answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. And we finally turned the thing on, not just to time you, but we had the times panel set and they went long, and so we're not trying to torture you. We could probably spend all day.
I regret to say I didn't notice it.
You were great, really. It was great. I do, however, have a couple of questions, again, in the spirit of understanding, but also in the spirit of this being a moment where we are all coming together to try and get up to speed. And Roger and I have talked about this at times in the past. I spent a lot of time on the early grand plans in the 90s and then very early 2000s in two different jobs, EPA and then with TNC as a consultant. And the plans, working with the Salt and Sea Authority at those days, were the grand plans, and in some ways suffering from the same challenge as has been mentioned on the 2007 Resources Restoration Plan, that they were big and grand and would be great if we could do them, but they ended up being a lot of paper exercise, a lot of time on EIRs and EISs that didn't actually get anything done on the ground for people, and didn't tend to focus on the air quality issue, which I think is the one with the bright lights and buzzers on it today that make it's imperative from an environmental standpoint, but it's really imperative from a public health standpoint. Can you, or Roger, or whoever, give where is the authorities thinking right now on what a realistic restoration option might be?
Well, we have
a picture of where you are. That would be helpful for folks to kind of understand the state of play today, which feels like people are trying to make clear that we're at a reset, as opposed to the years that were spent on grand plans that didn't materialize, or a hope that something would happen down the road. And to staff, don't ever let us do something to say something's going to happen in 15 years without check-ins every year or two, because I'm just surprised.
You end up here 13 years later.
Yeah, that's not a good way to do it.
You know, thank you for the question. And there are a number of different ideas. The overriding one is that we can't maintain the size of the sea in where it was. There's just not enough water. Evaporation rates, it doesn't have to be tiny. There is enough water to sustain a reasonable sized one. How we get to that is still a subject of further discussion. We were having one last night, a very lively discussion about a technology that's been used in other parts of the world that uses a biotube to create a barrier that creates a smaller, that can be used to keep water one side or the other, and whether that could be used as a less expensive item to create a smaller lake bed that would be plenty for the avian population, plenty for recreational perspectives. That discussion is in its nascent stages at this point, but we're going to explore that in much more detail soon, because it's got to be affordable. It's got to be. I had the great privilege of touring the Panama Canal 2 months ago, and I saw the big new locks sitting on the side, and there's a lot of work going on there, and that's going to be a major world-changing event. The budget for that, $5.2 billion. The state's plan, passed in 2007, $9 billion, but no idea where it's going to come from. I submit to you that as important as this sea is to us, getting the U.S. Congress or even the state of California to put up $9 billion for that grandiose plan was never an option. We've got to come up with something that cooperatively, possibly using some of the recently available funds for environmental purposes out of the energy sales and so forth, possibly using some of the bond funding. Could we come up with a $500 million plan that uses these other technologies to create a smaller lake bed that is actually sustainable, and then reduce but not eliminate the need for the state to mitigate the remaining area that would be reduced in size but still significant? I think that's the general outline of a plan that will work.
When will the Tetra Tech study be complete? The one that was the $2 million study?
It's scheduled to be completed by March of 2016.
However, we anticipate getting...
There are 7 milestones in the study, and we're working on milestone 4 now, so there are some interim documents that'll be coming out.
And my other question is, what kind of decision-making process do you have at the Salton Sea, or at the Salton Sea Authority? Is it a consensus-based approach? Do you vote? I mean, I
Yeah,
don't
it's a
really
public
know.
meeting. We work under the Brown Act rules, and we vote on issues. I'm proud to
I
say
mean, do you
that
have split votes? Is that
most of the time,
possible?
no. Most of the time, we are.
But it's possible.
It is absolutely possible. We
Okay.
could have a situation where I'd be the vote, just like that poor guy that was talking earlier today. But it doesn't happen very often.
I'm interested in the restoration techniques, whatever the investment here. We can't be fooling around with engineering solutions that we have to keep propping up over, year after year. We need to design with nature and what nature does in a sink setting, because that's what the Salton Sea is, and we have them in Nevada and Arizona and the Great Basin. They're around the world. What are some of the techniques that are used to abate air quality issues in natural sinks, and how can we use natural processes that are much more cost effective in the long run?
Probably the best place to look for those kinds of solutions is what you saw on the screen earlier. Mono's got about 4 or 5 different techniques that they use to maintain dust control in those areas that are exposed. We will have, we hope, some form of a lake bed with some kind of containment that has to be engineered, and exposed areas to use those various techniques on. We have not settled on what kind of barrier. We know it can't be the 9 or 10 mile, no, 25-mile dam that was proposed by the state plan for the $9 billion plan. If it's not that, what will work and what can be done, and in some cases, while we may need some help legislatively to allow us to do this, because this is a unique situation that doesn't require a Hoover Dam, but requires that we partition some areas off so that some are more recreational and some are designed to keep smaller amounts of water to keep dust down. It's a very complex conundrum that we're working through, but those technologies do exist. The biotube that we're talking about is in use in many parts of this country. It was, I think, pioneered in Europe and in Holland, particularly, where they have a need to maintain water behind barriers. So we're looking at that more rigorously now, because it looks like something that we could actually afford to do.
Can I go back to the study that's being done?
Sure.
What is the goal of the study? Is that going to be to come up with a realistic
I think Roger would be the best position to explain it, or maybe Bill.
It's basically an action plan is what we're calling it, and we're in the first phases. We've done initial data compilation. We've looked at all the methods that have been looked at in the past. We're looking at different. In the past, it's always been, the solutions have always been focused on maintaining elevation of the sea. If we look at a smaller sea, then a lot of the plans that were looked at in the past may be more cost effective, because we don't have to maintain the elevation at the where it was before. So right now where we are is looking at a suite of alternatives that would be, what would you do if you had $1 million? What would you do if you had, different increments of funding, so that how would you spend your first dollars? How would you spend your first 100 million, your first billion? So there'll be a suite of alternatives.
And those would deal with both the lake, maintaining the lake at some elevation and stabilizing the exposed?
We'll look at that. Some of the alternatives in the past, and what would they be in current dollars versus other alternatives where you don't maintain the elevation at any particular point, but you have a viable sea, a viable lake, but it's smaller.
And I point out that we are going to look at technologies and look at financing. One of the financing is an infrastructure finance district to be funded by local property tax increment. If we are successful in this effort, the value of the lands nearby is going to skyrocket. But that's a ways down the calendar, and we hope it's real. But if it does, that would help and be part of the solution.
There would be some certainty.
Some certainty and some local funding to match state and federal funding, which I think is going to be important going forward. So we're looking at all of those. The study is engineering, but it's also finance, and where's the sweet spot where those two come together.
I appreciate that. One thing, just as my engineering and biology background, I see a system that's evolving, and I appreciate the authority in your statements and statements of others recognizing that there are changes that you need to manage around. So the idea of a static sea level is a fantasy in terms of looking at climate change, looking at water conservation, Mexicali's reuse of their wastewater. All these factors mean that it's a dynamic situation, and I just urge you to continue to recognize that in the design of the sustainable solution for the Salton Sea.
One of the most beautiful features of our valley is as you look along the mountains to the west, you can see the outline of the ancient seabed. That was about 800 years ago. I don't know how you define ancient. Yeah. That's not the level. The level of 1950 is probably not the level. We've got to come up with a plan for a sustainable resource that meets all of these criteria.
I appreciate it. And again, I don't want to, I want to be positive here. I think you're in the right direction. It's just, from an engineer standpoint, we don't want to have stranded assets. You don't want to build something and then 25, 30 years later say, look at that thing high and dry. We spent $100 million trying to make that thing work, and it's a joke, to the next generation. Let's avoid that, and let's design with nature and the processes, the climate change that's happening, and come up with a design that 2 generations down are proud of.
Or
So
5.
I think its authority has a huge leadership role in this. And
Thank you.
thank you.
I see on your website that the authority is aggressively pursuing projects that can be expanded from near-term to long-term actions.
Right.
Are there any activities in the interim that can be taken?
There are many, and we've undertaken some. Roger, would you like to comment on some of the existing programs?
Sure. We're currently working with the state on the financial assistance package program. The authority has one wetland project that we're putting together on the Torres Martinez tribal properties. We're also moving ahead and now looking at the geotube that Mr. Benoit was mentioning. It's a pilot project that we're going to be doing on the north end of the lake. We're going to be trying a couple different technologies associated with geotubes. One is for retention of water. The other is the potential for possibly creating roadways onto the wet surfaces of the lake, which might facilitate future development of geothermal plants within the wetted areas of the lake. So we're trying these things out because they, as Mr. Benoit was mentioning, they have a chance of lowering costs, but it also gives us the flexibility of working in the wetted areas of the lake. And traditionally, that's been very difficult when trying to create berms. You have to build the road into the lake. So the other thing is, because they're very flexible, we can make them fit a lot of configurations. We can partition geotube areas off very easily. We can use them for weirs if we want to cascade water from one higher quality water area to another. So we're very interested in this, and we plan to be working with the state this year to break ground.
I appreciate that discussion, because I think these things are possible. And for inspiration for folks, look to the Upper Klamath Lake and what our regional board staff are working with our Oregon Department of Environmental Quality on what seem to be intractable issues with nutrients there, and going about using natural systems in a diffuse way. And they're seeing measurable improvement at the bottom of this massive lake that's comparable to the Salton Sea. So, I think I'm encouraged by this kind of discussion and pilot testing. And I think you've used the term, and we do this around the state, talk about no regrets actions, in terms of these early implementation. So we're really, that gets us going, because we see results in other really difficult areas of our state and nearby. So I look forward to hearing more about that. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good to see you, too. Thank you. I am going to suggest, we're running more than an hour behind schedule, so I would like to encourage our next speakers to think about ways to pair their points, because we also then ask questions that take a longer time. And we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to work through till 1. Is that okay with you? I just think, I sense the room needs a little bit of a break. Check your email, do it, make your phone calls, but 10 minutes. Thank you very much. We're going to get back. We're going to get back to the presentation. It's on.
We're going to resume.
Thank you. Maybe we go back to the old ones, I don't know. Great. Thank you. I know there are quite a few people who are here, and we have a number of individual comment cards, and we're way behind time. So we're going to resume with the order, and again, as I've asked everyone to try and shorten their presentations, it'll be appreciated by everybody in the room behind you. So there's this karmic thing going on. At some point, I know of at least one person that has to make a flight. I'll try and make some adjustments so that we can also take a little bit of the comments, but the panelists did ask way in advance, so we need to try and roll through those. So we'll just do the best we can. So with that, I'm going to turn it to the Natural Resources Agency to tell us what's going on and what's up.
So thank you, Madam Chair and board members. So I will jump right to the point, kind of the meat of my presentation that I prepared, but kind of to start off, I thought, to put this into perspective, it's hard to grasp up here how large the Salton Sea is, and we face a huge challenge when talking about it internally and externally to kind of grabbing people's attention when you discuss the impacts that the sea is going to cause in the region. When I think it was Mr. Kelly's presentation, I was looking at when they were looking at the acres that were going to be exposed by the lake, they equated to something about 156 square miles of land, which, when you think about it, kind of driving your car around, it's a very significant, real kind of problem at a scale that we don't always manage with our natural resources program. So there are large challenges when you face something of that scope. With me, well, I'll introduce my colleagues later, but we have the Department of Water Resources and the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Director Bonham and Kevin Hunting were planning on, we were discussing their participation in this event, but they are in Assembly Subcommittee 3 this morning, so they have some big issues in front of them over in the legislature, so they extended their condolences. They couldn't make it. So starting out at what I think will be a series of talking points that largely mirror everybody, the talking points that we've heard so far. The baseline of the Natural Resources Agency, our operating assumption is that, regardless of the fate of the mitigation flows tied to the QSA, we are facing a reality of a much smaller Salton Sea, and and the droughts, the droughts in California and the Colorado River Basin are really putting pressure on Western North American water supplies that were never envisioned when the QSA were signed. This is changing the fundamental lens that we're looking at when we're dealing with water issues in this region. Inflows from Mexico, as was mentioned, are declining as reuse and treatment increases, and the larger drought on the Colorado River Basin is so drastically beyond the realm of kind of the understandings that fed into all of our Western water agreements that, we're faced with a simple truth that we either plan for increased conflict around this resource or we come together and look for solutions. Together, taking an honest look through the lens of these realities, we have to be very frank about what restoration of the sea means today, and confront the reality that air quality impacts are going to be very real to the residents, and the impact of the the impact of the shrinking of the sea to the birds and the fish that depend on the sea are in some ways unavoidable and are going to be dire. Next, I'd like to focus on the funding solutions that we face with the sea. To date, the majority of the funding used at the sea has been from state obligation bonds. Through Proposition 1, the governor and the legislature and voters qualified the Salton Sea for funding. I saw this as a significant achievement because it became an issue of a regional importance for the legislature, and I know from the members that we work with that it continues to be a priority for them. The Salton Sea will see funding from Proposition 1, but it's important to temper expectations here. As you know, the bond is filled with sections that provide funding for a need that outstrips by many factors the amount of money that's available in the bond. And sometimes the most value in a general obligation bond is to use them as an organizing tool to get locals and stakeholders and planning agencies moving on getting projects ready so that when the time is to fund those projects, you have a multifaceted strategy to grab those funds and put them to work. Salton Sea here is no different. Prop 1 gives us an opportunity to build a lot of restoration projects, but even under their best scenarios, it and future state GO bonds are not likely to nearly start to build us out of the problems that we face. The value we want to see here is that they serve as a catalyst, and there's a lot of specific work we need to do in the coming months and year to get our next phase of investments ready so that when the time is to appropriate these funds, we're ready to deploy a good portfolio of projects that meets different standards of restoration. So we've spoken a little bit today about where the state has been with restoration and the $9 billion plan that was put together by the Natural Resources Agency under the prior administration. I wanted to say today that we, while we've done a lot of good planning and spent a lot of money doing so, the fundamental flaw of the comprehensive solutions, the $9 billion plan, is that, under the current fiscal and hydrological realities that we face, it just really isn't achievable that we can meet all of the guarantees that plan provided to the state of California. We don't consider the work put into these plans as wasted efforts. The majority of the technical and engineering work that serve as the underpinnings of the preferred alternative are useful and foundational for the no regrets projects that we're moving forward with today. But the idea that we can meet all of the objectives of the $9 billion plan just isn't feasible under the circumstances that are in front of us as we sit here today. So over the last 4 years, we've really kicked off a new strategy. We're in the first phase of what I would call a 3-phase strategy at the sea, and regrettably, it takes longer to implement some of these projects than we would like. But kind of going back to the scale and scope of the jobs before us, it's a challenging task to mobilize projects that are roughly the size of Golden Gate Park, or some other larger conservation efforts. But the first tier was really to take state bond funds and put 30 million, more or less $30 million of no regrets projects onto the playa, and diversify those investments so that we can test different strategies to meeting different levels of restoration. Kind of in a very plain way, it's looking at different ways to put water on the ground to meet different objectives. And the state took on the kind of most challenging aspect of that spectrum, which is to build deep water habitat for fish and bird life. We're in the middle of that project. We're partnering with the Imperial Irrigation District, and we're really trying to forge a partnership that will kind of lead to their involvement in the construction of all future restoration work down at the sea. They will be the managing contractor involved in the project, and we're looking forward to that relationship growing. Skipping then through all my written comments to some kind of focused points.
So,
the second,
just your fill of space. So when Richard Katz said the state will take this and sent that message in a previous administration, because I was hearing, what's the state's obligation? We're trying to temper that idea, that conception, the preconceived notion, which is what is possible for us to do. So you were saying with Prop 1 funding, the state has a role here with the voter-approved money to really create a catalyst for a sustainable funding solution moving down the way. So that's a little different than the state will take this.
Well, I mean, Proposition 1 was negotiated with the legislature and the governor and further approved by the people, and it provides a limited amount of funding that can be used for the Salton Sea. So it's how do you take that money and kind of use it to do more than to meet the needs that are much greater than that funding can provide for.
Right, so pay for leveraging.
So leveraging, but also, like making sure that our choices in the future are efficient, because you have to test out different strategies to know which strategy you will follow kind of moving forward. So right now, we've invested in this portfolio of projects, and we're going to learn from those projects, and then we're going to engage with stakeholders to put together more detailed plans on how the next phase of investments will roll out. And I'm running along right now, so I'll try to wrap up.
And there'll be slides coming up to talk about those projects. And
the projects, we'll go into detail on the projects. But it is important to kind of stress that we have this opportunity with Proposition 1, and while we have a lot of projects that are shovel ready, what we don't have is a comprehensive vision of how we would roll that money out to meet all of the different needs, and then also overlaying that with the priorities of the region with economic development and other initiatives, how that restoration investment plan will kind of coexist with these other benefits for the region.
Yeah, so just to help the organization, so you talked about a three-phase strategy. So you talked first about the sort of portfolio of projects and planning, and you mentioned the IID's partnership and getting things done on the ground. What could you remind me then what the three phases?
So the first phase would be the no regrets first actions. The second phase is what we're going to be going into right now, which is a stakeholder joint process that looks at getting us ready for the Proposition 1 funding. This is something the Natural Resources Agency as lead for restoration work will be working with stakeholders on, and the challenge here, I mean, when we look at all bond programs, is how do you, there's a section in the bond that says projects have to compete for funding and be competitive, and so how do you make the entire portfolio of projects competitive? You build stakeholder buy-in and stakeholder support. So we're going to engage in that following up. So then the third tier, which the Salton Sea Authority covered perfectly, and is the engagement of the state with the authority on a long-term plan that really is designed to I don't want to say a plan, but it's more of a tool that's designed to give us facts around the choices that we face on the long term. It builds upon the preferred alternative that and the work that was done there to give us real numbers around cost and feasibility of those projects, and also how they relate to the current conditions on the ground. And it also is intended to provide facts around the potential for renewable energy and other economic development opportunities in the region, and looking at what kind of benefits that development can provide the Salton Sea for restoration. Because it's one thing to develop renewable energy, but then you really have to look at how that development might benefit the state of things down at the sea. Yeah. So
it's a long-term plan, like a capital and O&M, but it also takes into account other related issues like the energy development and doing infrastructure financing and all those aspects.
I think I see it as a plan, but it's a little bit different than a fixed plan, because what it does is it gives us the tools to do some long-term planning and prioritization down the road, which frankly was one of the greatest problems we faced coming in this administration, was that we knew that circumstances had changed, and the $9 billion plan would be an extreme challenge to meet. But time had passed, and we needed to look at what were the state of things today, and how do we make decisions kind of 10, 20, 30, 40 years in the future.
Mm-hmm. I have a question about the Tetra Tech and Salton Sea Authority's description of sort of the path that they're on, and it just seems that even though they have some interim actions, that I want to make sure it's consistent with what you have in phase 1 on no regrets. Are you viewing the sort of the launch pad for phase 3 as that Tetra Tech study?
Yeah, I would view the Tetra Tech study as the phase 3, the heart of phase 3. Fortunately, we're working together on the development of that plan, and a lot of the analysis and the analysis that's being put into that I think will inform the immediate short-term investment strategy that I'm saying we need today. So it's kind of layered. It kind of crosses over to 2 and 3.
Okay, so I think it's important that we have collaborative solutions, and I'm hearing that there is collaboration with the authority on phase 3.
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
I mean, phase 3 is their study and the involvement of all the stakeholders around that study.
And then other partners, IID, the county, on phase 3?
Well, the Salton Sea Authority is a body that involves, many local partners, and it's a public space to discuss these issues. But all along, since I've been working on the Salton Sea, we've had a very, very close stakeholder relationships on all the decisions that we're making here, including all the frustrations with how slow things are going, on some of our projects. I think we're all looking at this through the same lenses right now, but it's just really important for the. It's important to really take on the local stakeholders' concerns and ideas about how to move through our process faster, because we tend to, the state tends to bind itself up. So we've really tried to forge local partnerships to break those patterns, and also reduce cost where the state kind of comes in more expensive than other people in the past. So that's where we are right now.
Can I ask a question on the architecture of this? So you have the 3 phases, and there are people who have been working with you on these test projects, and we're going to hear about them in just a moment. And then you said the second phase is a stakeholder process to figure out how to leverage and use Proposition 1. And then there's the longer-term dialogue where you'll be engaged with the Salton Sea Authority, which seems appropriate. Is the architecture of this out for people to see? I mean, have you started a stakeholder process on Prop 1? Do people know that there are meetings?
So we have not started a stakeholder process on the Prop 1 funding, but that's something that we'll be looking at from the resources agency to see how that the best way to organize that conversation.
Is that in the next month or 2 months, or what's the timing?
I think
the only reason I'm asking for some specifics is only because we heard earlier today, and have heard in some of the comments, that people feel like nothing's been done. You've expressed the same frustration that it takes a long time, but if people knew there was an architecture,
right,
even if it's a plan to plan in different ways, that would give people something to.
I think looking at budget cycles to get to the point where projects could be ready for the next budget cycle or the budget cycle after that, we don't have much time to lose to get agreement around these. The work that needs to be done is detail-oriented work. We have to bring in consultants and technical experts on how to scale out the projects we're working on, and how to incorporate some of the priorities at the local level. This work is time-consuming, but I think a lot of people are doing this work in their own silos. So I'm hopeful that once we kind of kick this off, it taps into a large body of activity that we all know is going on right now in everyone's different places. So I can't give you an exact time when we would start, but I don't see us having multiple months to wait and consider this. It's an immediate need. And in the meantime, we're really pressing to get the construction moving on projects that we've funded in the budget, and we're having a lot of progress getting those finally to construction. But my colleagues will talk about that
Well,
in
why
more
don't we-
detail.
Why don't we just move into the projects? And again, we've asked questions, but the pictures are great, and just the more concise you can be, it's also, people can grab it.
Okay, so hopefully somebody can launch the presentation. My name's Kent Nelson. I'm with the Department of Water Resources. I work in the Salton Sea Restoration Program. My staff provides support services to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Excuse the name change on the screen. It is the Department of Fish and Wildlife, not Fish and Game. That cover slide was created just before the name change occurred, but the rest of the presentation is new. So yes, my colleagues provide support to the Department of Fish and Wildlife in the execution of the Species Conservation Habitat Project, which I'll discuss with you, and the Financial Assistance Program. So again, we're going to talk about these two projects. One is the 3,770-acre preferred alternative for the Species Conservation Habitat Project. The other set of pilot projects are the Financial Assistance Projects. There are 3 of them that my colleague Vivian will brief you on. I'm going to guess, and I hope the forward arrow is the one that works. There we go. So again, our major cooperators and collaborators on this, from the top is the California Natural Resources Agency. Keeley is my primary contact there. California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Water Resources, the Imperial Irrigation District has become a very important partner of ours in implementing and helping design and support this project. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, of course, with their Sunny Bono National Wildlife Refuge, has an interest in what we're doing with the Species Conservation Habitat Project. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers also engaged through the permitting process. U.S. Geological Survey, as you know, have expertise that are situated at the Salton Sea that help with environmental and ecological issues being resolved at the sea. U.S. Bureau of Reclamation also